Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be showing you guys how I personally brief my cases and kind of how I read them, how I break them down, highlight stuff and all that. I do want to make some disclaimers before I get started. So number one, this is just how I personally do it. Of course, this is not 100% the right way. There's many ways you can do it and it's all a personal preference, but this is how I choose to do it and what's worked for me. Number two, I'm not a teacher. Again, this is just how I do it and how I've learned it. You can alter this to however you want. You can change certain things. You can use different highlighters. It's all about what works for you best. So if what I'm explaining here is not working for you, then maybe try switching it up or try something different. But like I said, this is my experience, so I just wanted to share that with you guys. And you can change things here and there. If the whole thing doesn't work, you can change a certain thing. So yeah, just take this with a grain of salt. This is just how I do it. This is how I personally prefer it and what works for me. I am not an attorney. I am not a teacher. So again, this is just how I'm doing it. Also keep in mind that I am a first-year law student. I'm barely on my second semester, so this very much may change as I go on through law school. But like I said, this is just what's been working out for me. As a 1L, I feel like it's very important that you establish a routine, kind of figure out what works for you and what doesn't. So this has been working for me so far. Again, it might change my second or third year. I may not be doing it as detailed or as often anymore, but it's very crucial that you try it your first year. Okay, so here's an overview of what I usually have when I'm about to brief a case. Obviously, I need my laptop because I take my notes on my laptop. You will need highlighters for the most part. You don't need the colored pens, but I like to personally use them sometimes. If you're a very visual person, you really need to have different colors of pens and different colors of highlighters because you will be color coding a lot. And then of course you need the book that you will be briefing. Okay, so here's an example of the template that I use to brief my cases. Like I said earlier, this is all very subjective, so you can switch this up as much as you want, or you can add things, take things out as much as you want. This was just the one that I feel like works the best because it includes everything that you need to pull out from a case. But again, you can always add and take away things. Sometimes I don't fill out every single part of this brief, so again, it's just up to you. So as you can see here, I have the case name. You'll want to include the name of the case, and sometimes you'll want to include the court. But as you can see, I do have that option right below. So sometimes instead of putting it here, I just add it here, or sometimes I just omit that. I don't always need to know the court and the date. So if it's very important, you might want to include that. Next, you'll see the procedural history. What that means is if you are in an appellate court or a Supreme Court, that means that your case has already gone through previous courts. So you'll want to see what those previous courts ruled. So if you're in a Supreme Court, you want to see if the appellate court either reversed the trial court or if they affirmed. And then of course you want to see what the trial court ruled, because if the Supreme Court or if the appellate court affirmed, then you'll want to see what they are affirming. So you'll want to include that there. Sometimes you'll be in an appellate court and they'll reverse the trial court, so you'll kind of just want to see what the trial court ruled. Then we move on to our question, which is our issue. That's a very big one because that is what you're mostly pulling out of cases. So this is where we get to our issue spotting, which you'll be doing a lot when you read cases or when you're reading law school essays. So you'll want to put your issue there. Then you move on to your trigger facts. So for the trigger facts, you don't want to restate the whole case. You don't want to put everything that happened in the case, just the very relevant facts. So if you're talking about a DWI case, you won't want to put exactly the bar she was in or something like that. You'll just want to put that they were driving or how fast they were going, or just any facts that are just relevant to the issue and to the rule. Moving on to the rule, you see that I have a big space for the rule, and that's because sometimes the rules are pretty long, but this is probably the most important part of your brief, just because, well, actually no, the most important part will probably be the reasoning, but of course the rule goes with the reasoning. So there you'll be pulling out what the court based their reasoning off of. So you'll see that a little bit later when I go through the case and while I'm briefing from the case. So you'll see that then. So for the reasoning, this is probably the most important part of the case, just because here you are tying together the issue, the rule, and why the court ruled that way. So you get to see how the court evaluated the rule, how they applied it to that specific issue, and how they are, interpreting the law. So this is the most important part of your brief. It's very important that you don't skip it, that you don't, just do whatever with it, because this is very important. And then the holding and the disposition is just how the court went. So if they affirmed, if they reversed, if they want to try a new trial. So that's where you'll put that. And then key takeaways are just other extra stuff that you might want to include in this specific brief, just so you remember, or so you can tie it to the specific rule or to that specific issue. So that's pretty much it. So now I'm going to show you how I brief on the actual book. All right, so before I move on to the book, I will be using the criminal law book that I'm using this semester. I do want to preface that I did buy this book used, so there is some writing in the book that I didn't do, but I just left it on there. I don't really mind it, I don't pay attention to it, but there is some excessive writing. I personally do my briefs on the template I just showed you, so I type them up. And then I also like to write on the margins of my book. Some people don't do the typed up brief, they'll just write on their book, and that's technically their brief. Some people just highlight, some people just do the one online. So it all depends on how you want to do it. It's all up to you. I like to do both. So really quickly, I'm going to show you here what I mean by the margins. So as you can see, I've written along the whole book. So I've highlighted, I have writings on the sides, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. So if you see here, it kind of looks like a lot, but I'm going to go step by step on why it looks like this and kind of explain what everything is. You don't need to do this much writing, like I said. Some people don't do it at all. Some people don't even highlight. So it's all just up to you, but this is what I do. All right, so here we have a criminal law book, and you see we have State v. Jakowski. This is a case that I've already read, and this case is based on mens rea, as we can see up here. So I'm going to start off by kind of explaining what each color means. So when I use the yellow highlighter, I use that for my facts. Again, you can color code however you want, use whatever colors you want, but I tend to use the yellow highlighter for my facts. I use orange for my issue. You gotta realize that sometimes some cases have more than one issue. So if you see more than one thing highlighted in orange, that means there's multiple issues, or the defendant is claiming something and I interpret that as an issue. I use pink for my rule, so you'll see that sometimes there's multiple paragraphs of pink, and that's because they'll be discussing different rules in different jurisdictions. So yeah, I use pink for rule. I use blue for reasoning. So here, if you see blue, that means that this is where the court is explaining why they're going in a certain direction or why they are ruling a certain way. And lastly, I use green for the holding. So if the court affirmed, if they reversed, etc. So here you see that I have that the court reversed. So sometimes they'll include that at the very beginning, and sometimes they won't add it until the end. There we go, reversed. So it just depends. So yeah, let's get into the case and let me explain to you what I've done here. So kind of just so you remember the colors. Yellow is the facts, orange is the issue, pink is the rule, blue is the reasoning, and green is the holding. So usually, but not always, you'll find that the facts will be in the very first paragraphs. Of course, you don't need to highlight the whole paragraph here. I try not to highlight the whole paragraph, so I'll just do certain little parts that I find are important. And then over here, we start to get into our rule. So sometimes I don't just highlight like the strict rule. So for example, here I highlighted the jury instruction because technically that's not black letter law, but that's what the trial court there used or like based their rule out of, if that makes any sense. So you can use this like to your discretion. So again, I don't always just highlight the black letter law for pink. I like to highlight like jury instructions or the law, or if they used a certain case, the case law. So I'll highlight that. And that also goes for the orange. So sometimes I use orange for if the defendant is arguing that something went wrong, so if there's a wrong jury instruction, that may not be the whole issue, but I like to highlight that too because I feel like it's important for us to point out that the defendant is arguing one way as opposed to, you know, the plaintiff. So that's what I did there. Sometimes you will have a huge paragraph of the reasoning. Other times you will just have something this small. So it all just depends on the case. Usually you'll find that the reasonings are obviously more towards the end of the case. Here we have it the very last paragraph, and then usually right after you will find the holding. So here it was reversed. In other cases you will see that, you know, it's reversed and remanded or affirmed. So for example, here it says we affirm, so it was affirmed. Again, you see the blue right before the holding. So that's usually how it goes. Usually it starts off with your issue. Usually it starts off with your facts and then your issue and so forth. Again, you can see that I've taken some notes here on the margins. This is just kind of pointing out why I highlighted this. So here, if I wouldn't have wrote jury instruction, I would have had to read it all again for me to realize that this is not like black letter law. It's just a jury instruction. Here, I'm using the rule between purposely and knowingly. So if I ever need to refer back to a case that I want to figure out the difference between these two, I have this written down here. So it's more like a guide. Here, I know that blue stands for reasoning, but I just want to, you know, point it out. Here, I'm writing down that this rule here is a common law rule because in criminal law, there will be model penal code and common law. So here, I'm just pointing out that this rule is just a common law and not a model penal code. And then up here, I'm just kind of bringing out the, you know, the most important part of my facts since I do highlight a lot. Here, I just found that they're arguing there's an improper instruction. She was asked to leave and she refused. And then you always want to write down what they are charged with. Sometimes in criminal law that might change. It might go from, you know, murder conviction to a manslaughter. So that's just something you want to point out because that might change. And then sometimes you might want to write the rule here. Of course, remember you already have it on your typed up brief if you are typing up a brief with the template I just showed you. But sometimes it's just easier to refer back to my cases. And if I have something written down, it's just easier to pull out rather than just read the whole case all over again. But that's pretty much just how I brief a case. I read the whole thing. As I'm reading, I'm highlighting, starting with the facts. And then you want to make sure that you do find your issue. There has to be an issue in every case, of course. If not, then there wouldn't be a case. So you want to make sure you find your issue, find your law, because you can't put together the reasoning and the issue and the holding if you can't find your law. So you want to make sure you find your law so you can see why the court is interpreting the law in that certain way. And then, of course, like I said, the reasoning is the most important part because this is where it's all coming together. This is where you will need to get really strong at, because when you are writing law school essays or any type of essays, you will be doing the analyzing part, and that's technically what this is. They're just analyzing the law, the facts, and then just putting it together to come to a holding. Okay, so here I just want to show you one case that I've already done that's already completed. So you can see I have the case name, the procedural history. It shows what they were indicted for, the issue, some trigger facts, not all of them probably, the rule and the reasoning. As you can see, I guess I forgot to write down the holding, but they do not need to be extremely long. Like this is probably a standard one. I choose to not write down the court and date just because I find that it's not very relevant for when I have to brief my cases in class, but you might want to include that if your professor asks for it when you're briefing in class. So this is just kind of what the standard one looks like. Does not need to be super long or in detail. This is just kind of what it looks like. So that is pretty much it. That's how I brief a case. Those are the things I use, how I go about it. It usually takes me about 10 minutes to read and fully highlight, write notes and all that for per case. Obviously that's depending on how long the case is, but for a standard case like the one I just showed you, should be about 5 to 10 minutes, and that's with me including highlighting, notes, and the typed up brief. So if you're wondering when you'll ever need a brief like this or why you need a brief, briefing your cases is important because if you are a school that does the Socratic method, which is almost every school, and what that means is that a professor will ask you to stand up and, you know, talk about the case. Briefing it really makes it easier because there you already have the issue down, you already have the rule, and then the reasoning, which is probably what the professor will ask you during your in-class brief. So it's very important for you to already have it written down or already have it like highlighted so you can just point at it and quickly find it in the book while you're talking about it in class. So it's definitely important for you to do that just so you can be prepared. Also, when it comes to your outlines or when you're preparing for your finals or your midterms, it's really easy to just pull out the rules from each case and the reasoning and kind of see how the rule was interpreted and just put it all together into an outline, or to just, you know, see how the rule or the facts are being applied. So it's very important that you do brief and that you do break down the parts of a case. You don't just want to read through a case and then move on with your life, because obviously there are very important sections to the case, and that's what you want to be pulling out from these cases, because then it would be literally pointless for you to be reading these cases. So the main purpose of reading cases and briefing is for you to be pulling out these important parts of it so you can later apply them to a different fact pattern. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys didn't get too bored or too sidetracked. If you want me to explain this a different way, or if you have any questions, leave them down below. Again, this is just one way of doing it. There are so many ways to do it, and it's all up to you. This is how I do it, but again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys stick around for more.